All right. Welcome to actually, it's the sixth Reaktor Blocks Exploration, but it's going to be labeled the seventh because I skipped number five. I actually recorded the fifth one and actually wrote it as the fifth one, and then when I labeled it, it was the sixth one. So I'm going to pretend the fifth one doesn't exist. It's going to become the noodle incident. So today we're going to look at a couple of things. One is an additional parameter and some of the other things you can do with a synthesizer and modular with extra input from the MIDI instrument itself, the actual controller. And then I also wanted to look at some additional modules, because what we've been doing so far has been playing with subtractive synths built from the blocks that come with Reaktor 6. But that's not all there is. I mean, the whole idea behind blocks is that you can actually have other people contribute their own modules that they build with Reaktor. So there's a lot of power you can get, from other people. So first, let's look at what we have here. A couple of things. One, this is again a typical subtractive synth. We have the note in going to two oscillators. We have a VCA ADSR and a filter ADSR that go to a filter and VCA. We have a mixer because we have the two oscillators, and we also have a couple of extra modules. One is the event watcher, which is this thing right here. What it is actually doing, we have it hooked up to the velocity, so you can actually see the velocity of the events as they come across. And then we have, lastly, we have a scope, which will allow us to look at the waveform of the sound as it's generated. So let's see what this patch actually sounds like. Again, it's very simple. The only difference between this and any of our other patches so far is the oscillators. Everything is wired pretty standard. Patch, the pitch goes into the pitch. We don't have any modulation on the oscillators themselves. We have a standard filter. We have standard VCA, the amplification. So what we can actually see here, though, is you can see the sound being generated here, and we can change the waveform, which actually doesn't change it much. But you can see there that there's some differences in the actual waveform. Now, part of that is because our mixing isn't set to such a degree that the waveform is entirely highlighted. We can do it this way. We can cull out the microwave oscillator simply by adjusting the wave over here. Likewise, we could always filter out the supersaw and see what this looks like. And see what our actual waveforms are. This is actually really handy. It's a little bit heavy on CPU. I mean, it's obviously kind of slow, but it's very useful for getting an idea of the sound that you're actually examining. And it's also really nice for comparison, because you can always hook it to any other synthesizer and see what it generates, and see if you can mirror that with your own synthesizer if you like. So what you'll notice here that I have a couple of different things. One is the velocity is hooked to the event watcher, which is pointless. But we also have the aftertouch right here connected to mod B on the bento box mixer. If you'll see here, we actually have some settings here. This is our waveform, a simple waveform. If I push the key down, you'll see that what happens is, as I push the key down, this, because it's positive, increases the mix on 1 and lowers the mix on 2. So what I'm doing is I'm adding some live feedback into how I'm playing. So I could, if I wanted to, I had a controller that did aftertouch really well. This one actually does, but aftertouch means you're pressing down harder after the key is down. But you can actually modulate your sound with how you're playing. This controller is actually the Nectar P6, which is a very simple controller. You can actually, you can get other controllers that are actually better for this sort of thing, like the Rolly Seaboard Block and stuff like that, the Linstrument, some of those other things. So you can actually have some really expressive sounds that are created as you play. The Seaboard Block actually has its own input for Reaktor, but I'm not going to show that today for various reasons. But here's something else that's really kind of interesting about this particular patch. This super saw and the microwave oscillator, these are actually parts of a Phi instrument collection. You can get this stuff through the Reaktor user library, which is nativeinstruments.com, Reaktor community, Reaktor user library. You can search it on Google and find it, or Bing or whatever. And it looks like this. You get a whole list of things. You have patches and user blocks, building templates if you're building your own. And you can like literally just search multi-effects, and it shows you all of these different things that have various multi-effects units and things like that. What typically happens, what I've found, is that you have a lot of ensembles and a lot of instruments. What you're actually looking for is blocks. The ensembles are complete instruments. They're actually not designed to be just dropped in and used. Like, this oscillator is not an instrument. It's an instrument. It's a block. It's not an ensemble. So what you're looking for is INS and not EMS, or ISM. I'm sorry. So whenever you download something, look for these things, and you can see these are where you're going to be able to put in things like this. These are more useful for me, although the instruments are very handy. Like if they have a synth A or something like that, you can import that and use that. That's a full instrument itself. But I'm enjoying the modular aspects of these. If you're doing the modules, these are a little bit more useful. These two, this one is a super saw and the microwave, come from, let's bring this back up, come from a library called the Infinite Phi collection by Sandy Small. It's fairly old, but it's also fairly small, and it's also really, really handy. There's a lot of stuff here. A super saw, for example, is a classic oscillator from Roland. It's actually a saw that actually has steps in it, so it actually has a little bit raspier of a sound. It's a triangle that, or a sawtooth. It's not a triangle, but it's a sawtooth that has actual extra additional steps as part of the waveform, so it's actually really raspy. It has a nice growl to it. It's a classic sound. Likewise, this microwave oscillator is it's actually a wavetable. So you can see all kinds of waveforms that are just there for you to use. Wavetables are really common, actually, really back in the mid 80s, like Grace Under Pressure by Rush used a wavetable synth, the PPG. They actually have a really nice digital sound. It's a really powerful thing you found all over the 80s. And just because you found it during those 80s doesn't mean that it's not a useful sound. It's actually really handy, and you can see you can create some really growly, really nice raspy things here and vibrate back and forth. And these are just two of the oscillators here. You've got, fuzz phasers. You've got stereo chorus, which I'm not bothering with, although I probably should. A lot of filters to play with, modulators. So we'll be playing with more of these as we go. But I just wanted to show off the oscillators because they're, it's really easy just to dump these into your file system. I actually put it on my D drive in Reaktor. And I just basically go down through the Infinite Phi and look for things that I wanted to put in, and then load them and just drop them in. Like if I wanted to have another oscillator, let's break this one in. Boom, I've got one. All I need to do now is hook the out to 3 and hook up the pitch. And now I have a new oscillator I can just drop in, and that's kind of the power of the blocks. That's what having the ISMs is really useful for. And I would beg people who create these blocks, man, please make sure they're ISMs so that we can use them in a modular structure, which is really the power. I mean, there are other block libraries that are focused on ensembles, and that's great. But at the same time, it's a lot harder to use those as, as a modular system, and I'm really enjoying the modular aspect of all this. So, if you're doing it, please, hey, create the ensembles, but creating the blocks is great for us modular people. Okay, so that's the 7th episode of this Reaktor Blocks. The 5th one is a secret. I don't know what happened. And that's this one. Guys, thanks you very, very much for watching.